And we're back. Here I am, Fly Navarro with Fly Zone Fishing, here with Captain Terry. Captain Terry, you pull into a slip or you pull in somewhere, you've got your boat, you got to tie it up. And that can get interesting.
Very interesting. Always the most fun around the marina is to watching the boats coming and going, seeing who knows what's going on and who doesn't. And it can be very entertaining. It also can be very dangerous. But
one of the things that I've always in my mind, I always said, you can always tell who knows the least by who's yelling the loudest.
That's right.
Whoever's yelling the loudest, they know the least about their boats.
Yeah, that's for sure.
So when you pull in somewhere, what exactly do you look for? What do you try to do when you start tying up?
Well, everybody's got a different technique that they use when they're coming into the slip, when they're going to tie their boat. On a big boat like the Patriot, I always like to get the bow line first. I don't have a bow thruster. Most of the new boats have bow thrusters, so it's not quite as important. But on a boat with no bow thruster, the bow line is your most important. So I want to control the bow. After I get the bow, I go to a spring, and then I go to the stern. There's 100 different ways you can do it. I prefer to have control on the boat and not on the dock. I like to put the loop on the dock, and I like to cleat off on the boat. That way I don't have to depend on somebody on the dock. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes you're so short, the bad conditions, and there is somebody there to help you. Then in that case, I'll put the loop on the dock, on the boat, and throw the line to the fellow on the dock or the dock attendant.
But a lot of time when you're on a big professional boat with a professional crew, you want the control to be in your crew's hands, not somebody you don't know's hands.
If you come tight on the loop and the captain says, take the loop off, there's nothing you can do without getting hurt, losing a finger, breaking the line. So, there's so many things that can go wrong by having somebody else control it. So I want control on the boat. It's always the rule on my rig, but every boat is different. With me, I like the loops on the dock, but it does look better with the loop on the boat in your slip that's your home base. The boat's the same situation every day. It's mostly not adverse conditions, but out and traveling, I prefer it the other way around. That way I can just throw the line off in an emergency. I can get out when I'm coming in. If I'm a little bit off the dock, I can cleat it off and get control of the boat. And
so let's go over a couple things. Number one, you talked about bow, spring, and stern. Let's talk about exactly, for people who are not familiar with it, your bow line is...
That's the pointy end of the boat.
That's the pointy end, right there.
Yep.
That's your bow line. That's what you want first.
Yeah, I prefer that first.
And you want that first because your engines are in the back, and that's going to give you your propulsion.
And depending on the situation, the windage of the boat, when you're coming in, you lose the bow, and once you lose the bow, you're going to hit something. So we want to hit the softest we can. So if I can grab that bow and hit soft, that's what I'm going to do.
There you go. So then now you move to your springs. What are spring lines?
The spring line is, in most situations, you're backing into a slip, and sometimes you're going forward to a slip. So there could be a seawall or another boat. You want to stop the boat from being able to go back far enough into whatever it may be hitting, whether it's going to be a seawall, another boat.
Okay. And also you can use a spring to go in the other direction.
That's correct. You may have a boat in front of you. You may be parallel parking per se. So in that situation, you'd want a forward spring. And most situations, you're going to want a forward spring anyways, because you never know what the weather's going to do. You're leaving your boat. Maybe you're leaving it multiple days. If you're leaving the boat, there needs to be 2 bows, 2 springs, 2 sterns. And
your stern line is?
The square end of the boat.
There you go.
Back where the motors are. So anyhow, that's what I've always followed. It's worked well for me. We've done a lot of traveling, and you feel very comfortable when you go to sleep at night. Your boat's tied correct.
Now, one of the things I want to bring up when you said 2 bows, 2 springs, and 2 sterns, we're sitting here right now. We only have 1 bow on. We're just in here temporarily.
Yeah.
But if we were going to leave this thing for any kind of time, you'd want a second line going across.
Yeah, we would want a second line across, or a way that the boat would be fendered not to get under the dock. So right here, we don't have a lot of tide, but there can be 3 foot. And so you got to think about the boat going up and down 3 foot. And right now, the way we're sitting, the bow could actually get under the dock. So the way you can stop that is by adjusting the bow and the stern for the pivot, and then placing your fenders that would hold you clear of the poles and keep you off the dock. So if you don't have that situation, or you don't have the fenders to do the job, then you're going to need to put a bow line across. So in this particular situation, we have a seawall across. We would put a bow and a stern line going across to hold us off the dock. And I would get it, a good foot off the poles to feel comfortable about it, leaving the boat unattended.
Now, in a location that may have a lot of tide, 10 feet, 15, some even 20 foot, where you've got a lot of tide going up and down.
Yep.
What do you do to combat that?
Well, the places with the big tide, normally they're going to have a floating dock in most of the places that I've been. So, it's not as critical as, your length. But if you're in a place with a 5 foot tide, if you're in a lot of the Carolinas, there's a lot of areas with 5 foot of tide. And anyways, with those situations, you want to make sure that you have a long spring and you want to have a long bow. You want to make sure those lines are not tight to the poles. So the boat has plenty of room forward and aft, up and down.
And now where do you locate it? Like you've already talked about the loops being on the dock.
Yeah.
Now, either is there a cleat or if there's a piling, where do you like locating those lines?
Well, general rule of thumb is I look at I look where the rub rail is, and if there's a lot of tide, I try to put the line where it's in a central location, not too high, not too low, because you don't want to, the tide goes up, it's the same situation. You can lock your boat to the dock, and the tide goes down, you lock your boat under the dock or to the poles. So I try to get it in a central location and have a good arc so that there's plenty of travel for the boat up and down.
Perfect. All right. Well, make sure you tie up your boat properly because you don't want to do any damage that's going to ruin your trip or ruin your vessel.
Yep. And of course the line's too tight, and then you got to worry about chafe. So that's a whole nother issue, how the line is attached. And so there's so many different case scenarios that, just to play it safe, you put enough lines, you make sure they're sufficient for the vessel. You always see boats I've seen many boats pull in to marinas and it's a 60-foot class boat and they have lines for a 30-foot boat, and it's just crazy, but that's just the way it goes sometimes, Yeah. And so I believe in having big lines. I actually overline my boat. So a boat that's a 39, I would have a 5/8 line on this boat. That would be my choice for this boat. And if I was traveling, I may even go up to 3/4, depending on if we're going to be anchored out or if what we're doing. We do a lot of tie-up alongside mothership, but 5/8 line on a boat like this would be sufficient. It's very strong, no problem.
It's always better to have too much than not enough.
Absolutely, more is better.
All right, guys, thanks for joining us here in the Fly Zone.